This podcast is brought to you by The Current. Ever wanted to sit down to a candid conversation with the marketing leaders of the world's biggest brands? The Current podcast is your chance. On The Current podcast, you'll find exclusive interviews with the experts and trendsetters who are on the front lines of digital advertising, and they always leave the ad tech jargon at the door. Subscribe to The Current at www.thecurrent.com or anywhere you get your podcast today. This podcast is brought to you by AdRoll. AdRoll is a name a lot of advertisers are probably familiar with. A leader in high-performance digital advertising for 15 years, AdRoll is a brand you can trust to deliver strong ROI across display, native, and paid social campaigns in one platform. Get in touch with an account expert or create a self-service account at adroll.com/ARI today. That's adroll.com/ARI today. Welcome to the Marketecture Podcast. We have a really exciting one today with Rich Greenfield from LightShed. We're going to abandon our normal format of just an interview and then news of the week, and we're just doing news of the week because there's so much news. Eric, you must be pretty psyched for all this stuff.
Oh my God. So we're going to cover TTD's launch of Ventura, the operating system. We're going to cover Comcast looking to spin off cable networks. We're going to cover MediaOcean buying Innovid, and a couple more things. And I could not think of a guest to have here to talk about some of these big moves in TV and streaming than Rich, who's just so deep in this. This is going to be awesome.
Yeah, Rich is, how some people say, I've got a guy who does my roof, or I've got a guy who is my car guy. Where Rich is
I got a few guys.
Rich is like my traditional TV guy. So we have some pretty big news. This is the 99th episode of Marketecture, which means next week is the 100th episode. Woohoo! Very exciting. We are publishing on Tuesday of next week before Thanksgiving, and we have a special guest for our 100th episode, Michael Casson, who is a legend in our industry, and he has Eric and I just laughing our asses off in this recording. It's hysterical, right?
It was so good. And apropos the 100th episode, we have something special for everybody. And we're posting on Tuesdays, so you have time to listen to it before you spend time with the family.
Yeah, exactly. And one other thing going on, which is on Monday of Thanksgiving week, I will be in my favorite place, which is the Virginia Federal Courthouse, where I'm going to be taking notes at the closing arguments in the Google Ad Tech case. So I will be posting everyone's favorite snarky newsletter on Monday evening about what I heard in the final arguments. In that case, it's not a decision. It'll be the final arguments. And then based on that, the judge and her clerks will come up with a decision we expect before the end of the year. So look out for a special issue of the Monopoly Report newsletter coming out on Monday. All right, that's a lot going on. Let's dive in with Rich. And we're here with Rich Greenfield from LightShed. LightShed is an investment research company and early stage investors in startups. This is a second appearance on the Marketecture Podcast, so he's going to get a purple blazer out of this. Rich, thank you so much for being here.
A purple blazer. I would just settle for a T-shirt. Maybe, a T-shirt would be fine.
We're working on a merch store. We'll probably have more to say about merch soon. So we're going to mess up this format. We're not going to do our usual interview and then news of the week because there's so much news. We're just going to do news, and more news. So, Eric, you want to kick us off with the Trade Desk operating system?
Yeah, absolutely. And part of the reason why we're doing this is all of the news that we're going to talk about this week is squarely in the sights of Rich in terms of his expertise around streaming and TV and the future of it all. So we'll start from the top. The Trade Desk announced Ventura, a revolutionary streaming TV OS. So the plan here is to partner with OEMs and aggregators to give them a new CTV operating system. The headlines from the announcement were basically two things. So first, they say it's going to be a better UX. So if you've ever had that problem of trying to find something to watch because discovery is really crappy on streaming, apparently they're going after that from a user perspective. And then obviously from an ads perspective, touting a cleaner supply chain, less hops, integration with OpenPath and UID 2.0. So let's talk about this. Rich, apparently you were very surprised that this thing happened.
This was one of the worst kept secrets in the advertising or, TV advertising world. It's sort of shocking. Well, I don't know why yesterday. I mean, it's actually interesting. Like, why was yesterday? I heard Jeff Green named Ventura after where, he was from and all that. His kids grew up like that. But what was yesterday? Was that a kid's birthday yesterday? I'm not sure why it was unveiled yesterday versus 6 months ago or even a year ago. But look, it doesn't surprise me that everyone is trying to control the TV OS. When you think of sort of the power of the TV, the big screen device in the living room, it makes a lot of sense for everyone to want to control that, the sort of center of your home media life. And we've seen big companies, right? Google and Amazon, obviously Roku in recent years. Lots of companies are trying to dominate the living room. The interesting thing is this is not a new phenomenon, right? The TV OS world, we've been, living in with lots of TV OSs for a long time now. It's, I remember walking the trade floor at CES a decade ago, and you would walk around. I'm sure, Ari, you probably remember this experience. You'd walk up to Samsung and you'd vomit how bad the interface was. And you'd walk over to LG and the remote control was horrifying. And then you'd walk over to Roku and you're like, oh, this is pretty easy to use, up, down, left, right with a purple button. And the simplicity was a huge advantage, but it was it doesn't surprise me that someone's trying to get into the TV OS space at all, obviously. The interesting thing is why now? You waited a long, long time to get in. That's what's really interesting of the why now for Trade Desk.
Yeah, I'll build on that a little bit, which is it does feel a little late. Probably if it was 2 years ago, it might have had a little more OEM excitement around it. But I think it's worth noting that if you think about it on a global basis, the TVOS business is actually kind of fragmented. There are a lot of little OSs out there, a lot of little manufacturers out there. I think we covered a couple of weeks ago that there was this deal where Tremor, which has a new name, Nexon, I guess, has exclusive rights to data for some TV OS I'd never heard of in Eastern Europe. There's a lot of weird stuff out there in this market.
Yeah, so Sonos is the one that they keep bringing up as somebody who has an OS, sure, which was somewhat surprising.
But look, when you go back in time, we were beating up on Comcast, which also had some news this week. But we were beating up on Comcast for years. Why don't you buy Roku? Why don't you get involved in this space? You're so powerful in broadband. Why don't you want to own the TV OS? And then finally, big lumbering company never executes quickly. It's just not the style of legacy media companies. It's finally a couple of years ago, they, announced sort of the Zumo push and what they're doing with Zumo. So it doesn't surprise me when big legacy media companies are a decade late. It's surprising to see Trade Desk and people look at it and go, well, what is Trade Desk doing? How are they going to get any distribution? This seems silly. This seems as silly as Comcast. But it's hard to think of Jeff Green and put him in that context of he has to see something, because I can't imagine he's okay just being a irrelevant player in this space. Zumo is not the market leader, and there's no I don't have any clarity that's going to make me believe that Zumo is going to be a market leader. It's hard to understand why Trade Desk wants to be a small player in this space.
I find it unlikely that, someone like a Samsung is going to switch operating systems on its devices. I think it's more about the niches. I think it's more about muscling its way in, either to players like Sonos who may not have a strong investment in this area. Maybe it's trying to convince someone like Comcast to use this instead of their homegrown one. Maybe it's white label TVs with some manufacturers. There's a lot of ways to kind of muscle in to get a couple % share here and there. And also he has money to play with, because if you have to assume this operating system just monetizes better than other operating systems, because that's why they built it. It's got UID2 in it. It's got contextual. It's got all this stuff that I'm guessing that's why they built it. So if it monetizes better, then you have money. You have money.
But let's have a little debate.
Okay.
Is he doing this to grow to be is this, Roku has what? I don't know, 50, tens of millions of US households have a Roku, device sitting in them. Obviously, some are dongles in second bedrooms, but there are tens of millions of Rokus that are sort of dominant in living rooms around this country. Is the goal to be Roku and to really compete head on? Or is the goal to get some first party data, have a little bit of market share, not ever be a major player, but just have a lot of have incremental first party data that informs the auction, makes them that much stronger, sort of like an AppLovin in terms of what they've been able to do by getting a little first party to leverage it into what they do for third parties. Like that, I'm sort of conflicted. Like, how bold is this? Like, is there a reason that this is there? Or does he actually want to take over and dominate the tvOS space?
I think part of the goal is to get across the table from people who don't have an otherwise reason to get across the table from him. Fire TV. You get a meeting with the Fire TV people. We have, let's just throw out the number. We have 5% market share of TVs, and you want your Fire TV app on our system. Okay, great. What sort of resale rights do we get? That's a conversation they don't really have a right to have today because Amazon could just show them the hand and say, nope, sorry, we're a walled garden. So that's my thinking, is get leverage on the distribution channels.
Okay. How do you make a better tvOS? When you think about discovery, I think you mentioned the word already, discovery. I open up my Fire TV and it's got a row of Netflix series, but it doesn't have Netflix content interspersed with all the other content because Netflix doesn't allow that, right? Like, I guess the question is Jeff Green going to get a tvOS interface that allows him to do things deal-wise that nobody else can do? Because the problem with discovery is I don't think it's a technology problem, meaning I don't think it's like Google doesn't want to do this or that. It is the programmers who are still dictating the rules.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I wonder if the opportunity to improve discovery ex Netflix, ex Amazon Prime creates an opening for that, right? So it's like you take TTV, they're the champions of the premium internet, aka the open web. Is there enough on the open web of CTV, right? The non-walled garden CTV, where they can just, create something that is the thing that sits next to the walled gardens. I don't know. I find it difficult to, fully kind of say that credibly with a straight face.
It's all
By the
about
way,
money.
Roku,
Like, is Google going to let them literally unbundle YouTube content and put Mr. Beast right next to Squid Game, right next to, Citadel, like all of these shows? Like, if you can't do all of that, and if we're saying the top 3 or 4 CTV applications are not going to be available to unbundle and mix and match individual pieces of content, is better, or like, I don't, it just, that seems sort of hard to imagine to me.
No, this better product thing is just not even important. Like they're not better UI, sure, whatever, maybe, maybe not. Who knows? It doesn't matter. What matters is money. We're at a bargaining table, and they have a chip other people don't have, which is absolute dominance over the demand. For CTV. And so if you're LG, I don't want to speak for LG, I'm just saying, if you're an OEM that has an ad business and you are in negotiations with, say, Amazon, all you really have is distribution. You're like, your app, it'll be front and center, you'll get distribution, and we want resale rights, and we'll do our best to give you a $15 CPM. Great. Jeff Green and team comes in and says, we have, call it 10, 20 billion of liquid demand that we could point wherever we feel like it. So how about you give us a better access to your data, and we won't SPO you out of the ads business, or we will give you a certain amount of demand, or we'll guarantee a certain amount of demand. It's a large amount of money that he has on the table that other people don't.
And could piece of it be, hey, Amazon Prime doesn't use Trade Desk today, right? He doesn't have the ability. It's a walled, the walled gardens that Jeff hates. If you can build up enough tvOS market share where Prime Video actually needs your access to your tvOS, does that open a larger conversation where you can no longer avoid us?
Yeah, there's also the financial advantage. It's built-in SPO as well. So let's say Sonos uses his OS. Instead of buying the Sonos inventory through Magnite, he's buying it himself, and he has better data. So it monetizes even better. And it's part of what the Trade Desk has been doing over the last 4 or 5 years is sort of a federated walled garden, like brick by brick. He's building the wall. He doesn't have the O&O that the other people do, but what he's doing is he brings in data like Walmart that's exclusive. So you can only really get it through Trade Desk. And then he does OpenPath. So he has inventory that's not exclusive, but better, and more retail data, CTV deals, things like that. And it becomes like a half walled garden or a partial walled garden, and you have to use them.
I think we can sort of all agree, the three of us, that scaling this Ventura initiative has real long-term benefits to Trade Desk.
Yes.
Okay, so we'll all three of us agree on that. Now the question is, that's all nice and fine and good. Sonos is not getting you market share.
No.
How do you do it? Right? Like the question is, I can do it over a decade, right? You know, X number of TVs, sign up TCL, you know, Hisense, and, you know, fight and be aggressive in retail and try to get onto end caps and all of that. But like, it is a very slow, cumbersome, brutal process that has, you know, I mean, you're fighting Roku, Amazon, Google, Samsung, you know, at these retail stores. How do you do it? Like, how do you actually get like I'm saying, how do you get 5 million, let alone 10 or 15 million devices in the next few years?
And also, what's the effect on the stock price when you start investing large amounts of money in either marketing or distribution or whatever it is in advance of revenue, which is not a pattern that's been the case for that stock previously.
Data point you asked about, Rich, the Roku households, it's 85.5 million as of
That's
October.
a global number.
So it's big.
That's a global number,
US.
and that includes
US.
dongles.
It's actually US, and it does include dongles. So it's a big market. And I think, Ari, you answered the question with respect to how do they get distribution. It's wielding their number one asset, which is all of the CTV demand that they have. And, you know, barring contracts with OEMs and platforms that just have penalties or, you know, kind of long-term agreements that we don't know, this could just be about using the demand to help accelerate their path to distribution. I could see a straight line path to it.
Yeah, it could also be a global strategy. You know, there could be we don't know what's going on inside the company or inside Jeff's head, but this could be
the
an
real
Eastern
money
Europe,
for Jeff.
India.
But the real
thing.
money for Jeff has to be U.S. ad dollars.
You would think so. Yeah.
I mean, at least U.S., Europe. I mean, at least developed Europe. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know. I just, is there anyone they could partner with? Like, does LG really want to be in the TV OS business? Like, you know, I know Samsung's built in interface. Like, are there players that go, like, why are we actually in this business? Like, are we actually good at this? Is this in good use? Or is there a better way? And look, it is interesting how much Jeff has focused on throughout his whole business model on being conflict free. And there's no doubt when you open up any of these devices, they always preference their own content. I mean, Netflix certainly preferences the content it owns, right? In the hero image, when you open up the Netflix app, you know, when you look across any of the platforms, Roku channels, obviously, you know, promoted pretty aggressively in the, you know, Roku Sports Hub or whatever it may be. They promote all of these things and use up home screen real estate and menu real estate. It'll be interesting when Trade Desk says they're going to be fully neutral and just serve the customer. What does it end up looking like? And does it actually lead to, because I think this will be the interesting, does it lead to better and different engagement than what you're seeing today? Like,
Right.
I don't know.
Well, let's thought experiment once again. Let's say you're a OEM with an ad business. You're LG. Let's say the Trade Desk BD people come to you and say, swap out your OS for ours. We give you the OS. It's customizable. You can change the colors. You can change the priorities. You could promote your own apps. It's an OS. You can do whatever you want with it. So it's like the Android model, and it will monetize better throughout. We guarantee you every single channel on that app is going to monetize better than it did previously. And we're going to pay you $10 per device as a royalty for using our app. Instead of you paying a dev team to build your OS, we're going to pay you $10 per device you sell, and maybe also guarantee you a certain amount of media spend on your media business.
My initial knee-jerk reaction is you violated, in the first sentence, the first principle that Jeff's trying to get at, which is they don't want to prioritize content, right? Like the whole premise his seems to be, we're doing this to be neutral. And so I don't know if he would do a deal. I think it would be more of, hey, LG, we'll give you a cut of revenue, meaningful cut of revenue, but you can't, get out of the fast business, get out of that business because you're creating a supply chain conflict Get out of that business and let us run it, and we'll just cut you a check because we're going to monetize better than anyone else.
I don't know about that strategy. I don't know if anyone cares about this supposed conflict of interest. There's a conflict of interest on the ad side, but I think in the content side, I have no problem with having a Samsung TV try to get me to install the Samsung channel. It seems like a perfectly fine use of the system.
I'm not disagreeing with you, but I'm saying listening to Jeff, that seemed to be a very key piece of this.
Yeah, and also on the Ad Tech God podcast, which was really good, he did like a little emergency podcast yesterday. The LG guy, I forget his name, but the guy who was on the podcast from LG, he was like, Jeff, stop with this neutrality talk. It doesn't make any sense. That was the thing that really got up his ass. He was like, this neutrality thing, it makes no sense. Stop talking about it. But that makes sense. He would say that.
I could see this being an attractive proposition. Also, so on, to take the other side of this,
attractive to the TV manufacturer to be classed. Okay.
Yeah. Because how do you truly scale an advertising business? You have to scale it with people. You have to scale it with operations. So if they can have, the best of an ads business in terms of the profit, in terms of, all the things that TTD can bring to them, and, kind of keep a core team that, does high level direct sales and account service, not only will you have probably a larger advertising business, but it'll be even more profitable.
It's a good point.
Okay.
I think
we
there's
still
so
go back
many
to,
interconnections
you still
here.
have to get to millions of devices.
Yeah, you do. All right, let's move on. Let's talk Comcast. Like, we've beaten Trade Desk to death, right?
Yes. So Comcast plans to spin off cable networks. So some of the cable networks that were once the entertainment giant star performers like USA, Oxygen, E, Sci-Fi, CNBC, and MSNBC, the plan is to spin them off. This is about $7 billion in total revenue. So it's not small. And this is clearly a move that reflects the general conversation we're having here, which is the future is streaming and CTV. What'd you think of this one?
$7 billion of revenue, but let's just be very clear, in secular decline.
Yeah, a melting ice cube, yeah.
Really important, right? A melting ice cube, probably accelerating in terms of the temperature on the ice cube is being turned up. I'm open to debate on this, but I would assume there aren't many people on planet Earth anymore truly believe there's a way you could grow revenue out of those assets. Meaning you're not going to get more viewers. You're not going to get, more advertising dollars. You're going to lose subscribers who are cutting the cord. There is no obvious way to grow those businesses. And this is not a Comcast specific challenge. This is whether could be talking Paramount. We could be talking, Disney's cable networks. Like, the one common theme over the last 18 months is everybody's trying to get out of cable networks. Like, sure, Jeff Bewkes sold his to AT&T. He was really smart. Rupert Murdoch sold the vast majority of his to Disney. One of the worst transactions in corporate history. Really one of those terrible transactions was Fox. But from the standpoint of everybody else, everyone's now waking up going, we got to get out. There's no way. We're probably running out of cost cutting, like how much cost we can cut, and the revenue keeps going down. And so you run into the sort of historic strategy of, hey, let's spin off this stuff we can't fix. And hopefully we can do enough M&A as a standalone to keep enough opportunity in the cost structure to create cash as this thing dies, a slow, long, painful death.
Well, the exciting thing is that the spinoff then could become a sinkhole for everybody else's cable networks. So it could basically clean up the balance sheet of all the major media companies by just, take Disney's channels and take, I guess, Paramount, like Viacom or whatever it's called now. I can't even keep track of that. But put MTV in this thing, put VH1 in this thing, just keep pouring all these channels that no one under the age of 40 has ever watched into one giant company. And maybe there's some synergy. Maybe there's some increased carriage fees you can get if you own every single channel on the dial. Could be creative entrepreneurship to make this thing melt slower.
It's hard because at the end of the day, if you think about things like FX, it's hard when FX is so tightly integrated into Hulu. It's the reason why Bravo wasn't in that list, Eric, that you mentioned, is because Bravo is intimately tied into Peacock. ESPN, they're launching D2C and bundling it in with, ABC or with Disney Plus and Hulu and creating sort of tiles inside of it. And so separating out these assets is difficult. Like Warner Brothers Discovery, everyone who is invested in Warner Brothers would love them to be just Max, HBO, and the studio. It's nice in theory, but billions upon billions of cash flow comes out of the cable networks, and very little cash flow comes out of studio and Max. And so separating these assets is not as easy as it looks. I would say Comcast, what I think people haven't focused on, Comcast is uniquely advantaged because the core of Comcast has nothing to do with basic cable networks, right? Comcast's balance sheet is all about broadband, increasingly wireless connectivity. Like even video distribution isn't even, a core component of Comcast anymore. And so, sure, they have theme parks and they have studio, like the basic cable, that $7 billion that you mentioned, Eric, call it a 30% margin, a couple $1 billion of cash flow. Like it's so insignificant in the Comcast story that spinning out that cash flow makes no difference to Comcast. And so it's very easy for them, whether it creates a good stock or not, they don't care. At the end of the day, it's an easy thing for them to separate out. Maybe there's some M&A, maybe not. Maybe it just dies on its own. I don't, we'll see. My guess is there will be some assets to pick up over time. Maybe not companies to buy, but maybe individual networks that people, Paramount's talked about selling BET. Could WBD sell something like Food Network or HGTV? Like, I think there'll be one-offs that they accumulate, but creating a standalone company, just to be clear, is not a save to this business. It's just I'm tired of looking at this being a disaster.
Maybe YouTube will buy it. They already are one of the largest distributors of these through YouTube TV. They get all the old archives. One of the funnier subplots of this is that the MSNBC network, which is, by the way, just like absolutely cratering after the election, they now have a name made up of two different companies they have nothing to do with, Microsoft and NBC. And there was some reporting that they may be forced to change the name of the whole channel.
At the end of the day, these are not assets. I saw the Nielsen chart yesterday or 2 days ago. The latest Nielsen gauge came out, and the overall cable TV piece had fallen to like 23 or 24% of total TV time spent from 36 just a few years ago. And remember, we're in an election year. So if anything, like cable news is, has a really unnatural benefit in that October month. Like you think about like, we're probably now in the low 20s organically. I don't know if it's 21 or 22 organically, but like this is a really dramatic drop in just a few years. And it's obvious why, right? Like less people have cable TV, but all the best programming is now on streaming. People are getting more and more comfortable. We just talked about TV OSs, right? There's more and more content that I can watch. These, we can debate how good or bad Discovery is on these platforms, but there is a lot of content to watch that doesn't require going into an MVPD or to your, traditional MVPD to watch content.
And these channels, that other than the Golf Channel, really just don't have a lot of sports on them. And sports is what's keeping a lot of traditional media alive.
We're going to find out. Is a little bit of EPL, is WWE SmackDown, and some news. Is that enough to keep you alive? And the honest answer, I'll be honest, Comcast certainly believes it is. And I'm sure Mark Lazarus, who's going from NBC Universal over to run this new company, I guarantee he believes it. And certainly there is no short-term deals coming up that is problematic. Like they've done most of their deals. And so the timing of this is clearly timed for major deals are done. They don't have like 50% of their distribution up next year. But, over the next 5 years, is this enough to stay alive? I don't know.
This podcast is brought to you by Sabio, a leading CTV advertising platform purpose-built to help brands effectively reach, engage, and validate streaming audiences. For over a decade, Sabio's platform has combined deep industry expertise with innovative technology to meet the needs of an evolving media landscape. Ready to unlock the power of CTV advertising? Learn more at sabio.ws/podcast. That's sabio.ws/podcast. Okay, I want to jump to a topic that is a little out of order, which is boxing on Netflix. Do you guys watch it? The Jake Paul night of boxing.
It was painful, not because my stream was technically challenged. It was painful because it was boring.
It was very boring.
As you know, Ari, combat sports are my thing. So you know that this was a big weekend, both in terms of Netflix and then UFC 309 the next day.
I was at 309. It was amazing.
Did we learn anything on the business side about the Netflix event? It being live, it paid. I don't know what the budget was, $80 million or something was paid to the boxers. Rich, what's your take on it?
If 60 million is global, I'm saying if you look at the U.S. peak was 38 million, global peak was 65. Let's just say similar discount from peak to average. If you believe like 35 million households turned on Netflix on Friday night between 11 and midnight, let's even say it was 20 million households. Let's just say the data's wrong. It's like less than that. What do you think the last time 20 million people turned on a television at 11:30 at night on a Friday? Like, my guess is that like never happens.
Appointment viewing,
ever.
Never.
And so the ability to, if I was sitting there at a league or any content platform and going, and just looking at my social media feed the next day, everybody was talking about it, like either hating on it,
we're talking
like
about
taking
it.
pictures of their team. Right. We're talking like everybody was talking about it. I think that's sort of the wake up call to every content owner of like, holy shit, the reach, engagement, and distribution creates an incredible opportunity to take advantage of. And it wasn't just doing the live event on Friday night. If you notice, they had a 3-episode like hype up, get excited, like the build up episode
UFC
series.
does that too. Yep.
Like they did a really good job of getting you excited and getting you into it, putting the actual weigh in on YouTube. Like there was definitely a really good strategy. But I think everyone, not just sports leagues, should be thinking about like, how do you take advantage of this massive reach?
If I was on the Netflix advertising team, I would have been saying, why the fuck aren't we putting ads in this thing? I don't care about our tiering. It's a live event. Put some ads in it. I think Netflix will move away from the black or white, it's either tiered or it's not. You get ads on the ad tier, you don't on the other. I think live will be the area where they cross the streams and start putting some ads.
Obviously, you're going to see that for football in a few weeks. But I would say the reason why you didn't see ads, and again, I don't know anything, but I presume the actual reason you didn't see ads, Ari, is that ads adds another layer of complexity. This was by far the biggest streaming event they've ever done. And why add even more complexity in terms of ad serving?
It's true. They build their own ad server, and live streaming is the hardest problem in advertising. I could guarantee you that. Over at the Town podcast, which I listen to religiously, they're just hyping up the Netflix Christmas game like crazy. So they have a football game on Christmas. I think it's two good teams, maybe Kansas City and somebody, and they have Beyonce. They have Beyonce doing the halftime show, and it's just like. If I was at a competitor, I'd be like, why the hell aren't we doing this? What do we not have enough money? Do we not have enough capabilities? Why are we letting Netflix just run the table here?
Well, remember, if you're the league, if you're the NFL, or if you're any of these sports leagues, you're recognizing, I mean, we just came from you said out of order. It's actually a perfect order. We were talking about linear cable television dying. Like, right? If you're a league, you have to figure out a plan for the future, right? Like, and unfortunately, there are not that many obvious choices, right? Like in terms of true reach and engagement. Yes, they do Sunday Ticket, but Google has not been a buyer of traditional sports rights of any substance. I mean, they've dabbled. Apple certainly isn't, they dabble with MLS and a little baseball, but you really have Amazon and Netflix. Like you really have two core platforms. And so I think the reality is leaning hard into Amazon, which they've done, and now trying to whet the appetite of Netflix. Like every league needs a Netflix strategy because they need Netflix to be a buyer, not today, not tomorrow, but over the next decade. They need Netflix to be a buyer because if they don't have more buyers than there are packages, they're in deep trouble.
I don't know the answer to this question, but is part of this that Disney and ESPN has had a convoluted streaming strategy and hasn't really figured it out?
Keep going.
Well, ESPN isn't streaming. ESPN is still in the old world where you need a cable subscription, and they keep talking about how it's going to be part of the bundle, but it's not yet. So Disney is not in a position to, spend $75-80 million on sports rights in a digital environment. That's my take on it, but I'm speaking just totally speculatively.
ESPN Plus is a streaming only product, and they spend hundreds of millions of dollars buying UFC rights. And if you wanted to watch 309, you were certainly, unless you were going live, you were watching it, on a pay-per-view basis through ESPN Plus. So they are there. I just think it's a matter of all of the companies, the traditional buyers of sports rights, are all balancing the past and the future. And what they all really are missing is that their streaming platforms, not only do they not have a lot of reach, right? Like you're talking about most of these platforms top out at 30, 40 million homes. And remember, even that is sort of, can I say bullshit on your podcast? Like,
yeah, we've been cursing a lot on this one.
Okay, good. Okay, so it's sort of bullshit, right? Because like, just as an example, Disney Plus has 10 million charter subscribers. Only 8 or 9 million of them have activated their account. So like a sub who hasn't even activated their account, certainly isn't getting engagement with the content. You're not selling advertising. And so the idea of, I almost want to move away from subscribers to active users, which nobody reports, but like there is definitely a difference between subscribers and active users. But even if you had active users, one of the big problems with all these other platforms is they don't have a lot of time spent. A lot of times you are going to watch Max to watch the Penguin on Sunday night, and then you're going back a week later to watch the next episode. You're not living and breathing there every single day. And I think that's part of the problem that all of the leagues have. It's why the NBA wanted to be on Amazon Prime and not on Max, right? Like, where would you rather be if you wanted to put live games? I mean, I've actually been, I think one of the biggest surprises of this season is that Amazon Prime's numbers for Thursday Night Football look like television. I mean, they're consistently doing 14, 15 million viewers on Prime. That's like TV, like what TV did. Like, it is not a meaningful, if you go back a couple of years, like that's what Fox was doing for those games. I mean, maybe a little bit higher, but like, it wasn't like season one where you were in the 9 to 10. You've now built up to a pretty healthy number. It's really impressive. Now you're adding in the NBA. You're building that flywheel of people getting more and more comfortable with watching sports on Amazon. That's a major change. And you think about how you're trying to seed the market, to answer your long-winded answer to your question, Ari. Like, that's what you're trying to do, is you're trying to build up so that Netflix gets that same muscle building into live events and sports over the next 5 years.
My ritual every Thursday is to go to watch the game and then spend a good couple minutes saying, where the hell is this? Where is this game? Like, what channel is this on? And I'm like, oh, Thursday. That's Amazon. Right. Okay.
There's a discovery problem.
All right. So we've got more news. Should we do, what's next, Eric? Mediaocean or Chrome?
We got to do Mediaocean. This is an ad tech podcast. So Mediaocean to buy Innovid for $500 million. This is so Innovid is a public company. Mediaocean is a private company.
When you say public, like with air quotes,
they're publicly traded.
Come on, man! You can buy the shares. I own the shares. It's
what I mean is, well, look, the SPAC. They were part of the SPAC wave.
Yeah.
Yes, they were a SPAC.
It's been a disappointing public stock. Let's just say that.
Correct. And I think the reality is, no, I'll be really honest, because I think this is important for your listeners. When startups go public and they don't attract attention as a public company, it does the reverse of being like, the reason you go public is to create liquidity, create excitement, create a public currency, not only to reward your employees with liquidity, but to create a currency to go out and buy things. When your stock doesn't work and you're a tiny public company, I actually think, and I think Vizio had the exact same problem. There was the exact opposite effect. It actually makes it hard to recruit people. Like, who wants to come to a place with a crappy public stock that nobody cares about, that isn't working, where everybody's underwater on their options? Like, that doesn't work. And so being private is actually better than being public. And you have Vizio going private to Walmart. You have the Mediaocean transaction. I think the concept is similar. This wasn't working as a public company. You might as well be private.
Sure. Previous life, I was doing some IR for a publicly traded company that acquired my business, Undertone, so Perion. And, I got to know some of the public market investors, and a lot of them couldn't buy the stock.
You can't
because
buy
it wasn't a certain market cap. And they were like, look, if you can get to a certain market cap, this thing's going to fly because all of a sudden people can buy the thing.
Yeah, someone explained this
so
to
I
me.
get the
Like,
point.
if you're like Blackstone and you want to have even weighting of the S&P 500, let's say, you would have to put so much money into Innovid, you'd be buying the company, or you'd actually have to put in more money than their entire market cap in order to invest.
You also don't like having things that don't have a lot of liquidity or hard to get in and out of.
You can't get out of it. You can't get out of it. Right.
And that doesn't work for a lot of investors.
Exactly.
Yes. Okay. All right. So we'll go back to talking about the deal, but good detour. Mediaocean, they have, basically the industry sewed up when it comes to workflow. They have flash talking, which is ad serving and DCO. Innovid had measurement, ad serving, and creative for CTV. So, you can take a step back and look at this as, they now have like a really interesting end-to-end offering on CTV.
Yeah, and Bill Wise has been on this show. He's a friend of the pod, but he was also just on the Monopoly Report just last week. So you could listen to the last Monopoly Report podcast and hear him talk about this specific market. And he says, I was a little skeptical about his numbers, but he was saying that Google's ad server, GCN, is so much larger than number 2 player Innovid. And Flash Talking is the number 3 player. So he's putting together 2 and 3, but he thinks 2 and 3 combined is only like 10-15% of the market. The GCN's that much bigger. I don't really agree with those numbers. I used to be the product manager for GCN, and I just don't think it's that big. I think DV360 is where all the action is. DV360 is $1 billion net business at least, but GCN's not. GCN's like a couple $100 million SaaS business, in my opinion.
Why do you think Innovid hasn't worked as a public company?
I think Innovid has, first of all, it's competitive, right? So
that's your point.
So they're going into accounts and saying you have to get off GCN, you have to get off Flash Talk, you have to get off whatever you're on and switch to us. So every single account is a knife fight. Secondly, the things that Innovid is really good at are niches. So they have a really, I've seen the product. They have like really cool product for like building dynamic CTV ads where you can put a QR code in it and get response. And that edit demos really well. It's really cool. And it's like a fraction of the demand out there for that sort of thing. Like it's just not an overwhelming demand. And lastly, like I think that if you look at the big public companies, they transact. Like Trade Desk, AppLovin, the way to make a lot of money in advertising is to be a part of the transactions, not to sell picks and shovels.
Yes. So let's talk about that. Because the thing that might be interesting about this is the direct insertion to pubs that Mediaocean has. Can this skip a bunch of people in the middle? Even people like TTD and Magnite and Pubmatic. Are folks at said companies looking at this and starting to feel a little bit of heat?
Well, Project Harmony was Innovid's somewhat innovative new product that Zvika came on this pod and talked about, or wasn't Zvika? It was I think it was Dave. But anyway, and I was at the launch event, and effectively what they're doing is they're pushing orders from the buy side ad server to the publisher ad server without any DSPs or SSPs involved. And
correct.
And they're doing a lot of new product development in that area. And with Mediaocean owning the buy side planning, you could connect these dots pretty well.
I think that's interesting.
I think so too. And I've said this publicly a bunch of times, which is the Trade Desk should have looked at Innovid buying it. It would be a really great synergy for the Trade Desk to be able to say to marketers, like, we track all of your CTV, including places we can't buy, like YouTube. We just track it. We help you understand the whole picture.
But do you think that's why they didn't buy it, is like they don't want to track things that they can't sell against?
Maybe, or maybe they worried that they'd be shut off from other angles because they'd be seen as competitors. But, 500 million, Jeff sneezes that amount.
Well, look, going round tripping, like that's what's interesting about Venture to begin with, right? Like you have a incredibly well-capitalized company in Trade Desk, an incredibly ambitious multi-billionaire CEO or founder who wants to disrupt the marketplace, like clearly sees an opportunity. I don't know why TVOS versus what you're talking about in terms of why he could have bought Innovid. My guess is he just sees this as there's something about the size of this opportunity that this is where he wants to devote capital, which is what has me so intrigued about Ventura is he's clearly picked this category, which surprises me. but also makes me believe that there's something we're missing in terms of how big his plan is.
Yeah, I think the theory that Jeff is a genius and well capitalized and aggressive is, okay, I'll watch. You got me hooked.
I don't think that's a theory. Yeah, I don't think that's a theory. I think Rich makes a very good argument.
I'm sorry, I should have had a disclaimer earlier, which is actually this podcast is sponsored by the Trade Desk. There's a pre-roll. I should have said it earlier. I forgot. We're being very
honest. Do you have any theories? But Ari, do you have any theories on why it was a secret for 3 years? I know a secret with air quotes for sure. But what was the reason for being so secretive? Like that's not clear to me. Like, what was he scared of unveiling?
Yeah, it is a little weird. I mean, I have to guess it's just to not distract the shareholders. They have their investor relations are top tier, and they probably just didn't want to confuse anyone with the story that they felt was off target.
Yeah, and I think it's a sequencing thing, right? Like, they were talking about very intentionally the premium web and UID and the importance now of the next generation CTV audio platforms. I think it makes sense if you think about the narrative from a sequencing perspective.
Right. And they were sort of forced to talk about it because it was leaked. A blogger newsletter I'd never even heard of broke the story like 2 months, 3 months ago.
Jenko's really good. Lopez is good. He's definitely good. He gets great. He has good sources.
Yeah, I mean that was such a scoop, right? There wasn't that much in the announcement yesterday, which makes you think they just kind of.
The piece I'm still confused about, though. The piece I'm still confused about is what is Sonos doing in the TV space or in the TV? Like they can't even get their software to work for their music systems half the time. Like.
It's been Sonos's app update is a different story. That's been a total disaster. That has Sonos customers just absolutely furious. So
they're not a sponsor of the podcast.
They are not. They can if you would like to sponsor the podcast. Ari at markdector.tv.
If you're getting into CTV, this is a great place to generate some awareness.
All right, let's talk. You want to talk Chrome?
Yeah, let's end it by talking Chrome. So the DOJ. Is going to ask a judge to force the sale of the Chrome browser, in addition to stopping payments to Apple and stopping requirements for using Google services and Android. This is a lot of asks.
It's a lot of asks, and you have to kind of squint to say how this helps anybody in any way.
most importantly, users. Yeah,
users, competitors. I mean, who buys it? As soon as you say it has to be sold, it's like who buys it and who do you trust to own the browser? You can't sell it to Microsoft, can't sell it to Amazon, can't sell it to Apple, can't sell it to Oracle. Like it's a very hot potato.
It's always laughable when people say, "Oh, we'll just spin off YouTube into a separate company and that'll solve some of the problems." And it's like, well, YouTube is I don't want to, there's not exactly like lots of competition to YouTube, whether it's part of Google or not. Maybe it works less well if it's not part of Google, but it's hard to see there being robust competition, whether YouTube is part of it or not. In terms of getting me to use a different browser than Chrome, or is there more competition if Chrome is standalone? Again, hard to foresee. I'm much more interested in how default search changes over time and whether Perplexity or whether OpenAI, like, can you create better search? Reddit's rolling out new search next year. Like, how search evolves is really interesting and something I'm paying a lot of attention to. And I think if you were to say, like, what's a top investor issue right now? It's how does search evolve? Like, what is search? What is SEO? Like, how does all of this change over the course of the next few years? Because it feels like there's going to be a pretty major change and no one's really sure. Is it Google's to lose because they're in the will Google Gemini because of the branding be good enough to keep it all, or will they lose market share because there's just such robust competition from OpenAI, Perplexity, what Meta's doing? Like, and look, I will just step back because I think Eric, brought up the DOJ point or the FTC and DOJ. I think it's really important. It's November 21st when we're recording this. Literally, there are 58 days, I believe, until everyone that we're talking about won't have a job.
Yeah, exactly. These are proposals from lawyers who are on their way out.
So just, again, it could be maintained. Like Trump has certainly not been a big friend of big tech. And, I saw Elon this morning attacking Jeff Bezos on X and then Jeff responding on X. Like what the relationship is between the new administration and Google, Amazon, Apple, Meta is still very much TBD.
Yeah. I'll just make one final point on this because we are going quite long, which is, and I made this point on Twitter also, which is this is the right remedy in the wrong case. Because as we've covered this extensively in the Monopoly Report, but the Chrome is under quite a bit of investigation in the UK from the Competition Markets Authority, the CMA, and that process has unveiled enormous amounts of conflicts of interest between Google owning Chrome and running the sandbox process and trying to change advertising and using data for advertising. So there's quite a bit of evidence, as well as just sort of a reasonable belief that the largest seller of advertising in the world shouldn't also control the largest browser in the world. Totally outside of the realm of search and search preferences. Search preferences is kind of like the least of the problem. So it's kind of interesting that this is part of this case when there's, you can make the argument it should be a different process with different jurisdiction that should cause the same outcome. Any final words? Because this has gone long, but we should probably wrap it.
This was a pretty busy week.
Yeah. And we didn't even get to all of it. Yeah. Everybody should make sure you're subscribed to the Marketecture newsletter because there's like probably 5 or 6 other meaningful news items we didn't have time for that you'll see the links for.
And next week we have the DOJ closing arguments that I'll be covering from the Monopoly Report. And on Tuesday, like we said in the intro, that we have our 100th episode with which is a special episode with Michael Kasson, and it's hysterical and awesome. So stay tuned and listen to that over your Thanksgiving dinner, and have all of your family realize you actually have an interesting job and know interesting people and stuff like that. So anyway, let's call it there. Rich Greenfield from LightShed, thank you so much. This was a great conversation.
Thank you, gentlemen. We'll see you next week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you for subscribing to Marketecture. New interviews are added every week at marketecture.tv and your favorite podcasting app.
Thank you for listening to the Marketecture Podcast. New episodes come out every Friday, and an insightful vendor interview is published each Monday. You can subscribe to our library of hundreds of executive interviews at marketecture.tv. You can also sign up for free for our weekly newsletter with my original strategic insights on the week's news at news.marketecture.tv. And if you're feeling social, we operate a vibrant Slack community that you can apply to join at adtechgod.com.